Good evening to all of you, and this is one of those unusual ones that we normally do once in a while. What we try doing is dealing with subjects which have sort of happened on the spur. अब हमारा आज का प्लान जैसे मैंने कहा था कि I'll see you all next week and only then we'll take a call on this कि what exactly is it that we are going to go ahead and deal with. And this is on the 2nd of January, if you remember this. तो हमारा last session जो हुआ था वो 2nd of January को हुआ था. अब 2nd of January को किसी को भी ये मालूम नहीं था कि 3rd of January को exactly क्या होने वाला है. And that sort of complicates everything. So obviously if something happens on the 3rd of January, it's quite legitimate that we have got to in some way or the other answer for it, sort of address it, take care of it. As far as the next session is concerned, that's exactly what we are planning to do over here. Couple of reasons in the sense that technically speaking बहुत कुछ कहा गया है और मुझे नहीं लगता है कि I need to like sort of even inform anybody कि what exactly is it that we are talking about when we are saying that we are talking about something that happened on the 3rd of January. So अगर हम ये कहें कि कुछ तो हुआ था 3rd of January को, 3rd of January 2026 को, कि जिसके बारे में हम बात कर रहे हैं, तो गलती से भी मुझे नहीं लगता है कि ऐसा कोई होगा यहाँ पे कि जिसको इसके बारे में बात करने के लिए I have to get started with this कि okay, this is what happened on the 3rd of January 2026. I'm assuming practically everybody knows as to what has happened on the 3rd of January 2026. Okay, so I begin with a bare level of understanding which says कि कुछ तो मालूम है, ऐसा नहीं है कि कुछ भी मालूम नहीं है, and we'll keep on building on that. Now, my concern is a couple of things which have been not talked about and a couple of things which have been talked about but not exactly by doing some sort of a contextual business as far as everything is concerned. So, one, people are like mesmerized by that idea कि you have a president who has been taken out in what seems to be a perfect military operation. Nothing going wrong. Hardly any sort of counterattack, hardly any sort of resistance, everything going perfectly all right, and you have a president who has been taken out. So एक तरफ से वो जो एक typical American films वाला charm होता है to these types of activities कि like a perfect military action is what you have been delivered on as early as that in the new year. So obviously there is a lot of talk around that whole thing. Yes, there is a certain sort of a perfection. Nobody wants to deny it. But on the ground, as far as Caracas and Venezuela is concerned, there's a lot which has gone horribly wrong. In terms of the fact that it's a sort of military action which has happened. You have violence which has been enacted. You have people who have lost their lives. You have a massive amount of bombing which has happened as far as this military barrack is concerned कि जहाँ पे ये activity हुआ था. But then this is something that people normally do not talk about and normally do not take on board. B, it wasn't an action which happened out of the blue in the sense that it was being planned for the last almost 6 months. So गए almost 6-7 महीनों से the American Navy was acting in this entire region as far as the waters are concerned. This is part of what is called the Caribbean Sea. And ये Caribbean Sea वाले एरिया में आपको almost गए 6-7 महीनों से काफी सारी चीजें हैं कि जिनके बारे में आपको ये नजर आता है कि there's a lot which is going on in terms of planning a military action. So you have Venezuelan vessels which have been blocked. You have Venezuelan ships which have been attacked. You have small fishing boats which have been attacked. So a certain sort of a naval blockade as far as this region is concerned has been going on for quite some period of time. So एक तरह से this operation was almost been planned and almost been in the offing for close to something like 6 odd months. So ये अचानक से हुआ है ऐसा वाला मामला नहीं है, almost 6-7 महीनों से चल रहा है. In terms of this is what should be done, well, it has a pedigree even longer than that. So this was sometime in 2019 that you, for the first time hear Donald Trump, that is his first presidency, वो जो पहला वाला है 2016 to 2020 वाला, तो उसमें 2019 के आसपास he's talking about something which says that the Venezuelan government has to go and Venezuelan oil has to be brought under American control. So that Venezuelan oil has to be brought under American control, that the Venezuelan president has to be thrown out of power, is something that he has been talking about since 2019. We are in 2025, which is approximately 6 years down the line. That finally it has been executed and finally it has been delivered. But that Nicolas Maduro should be taken out of power is what he has been planning for as long a period of time as that. अभी उसका ostensible target जो था वो, yes, there is something called as Venezuelan oil. There is a problem with the Venezuelan government as far as the Americans are concerned, and that's fairly well known. But more than that, that wasn't what actually motivated Trump as far as 2019 is concerned. Trump's basic motivation was the Democrats had let these governments carry on for a fairly long period of time. So, had the Democrats been slightly more active, had the Democrats been slightly more in the game, maybe this government would have had fallen a long time ago. So Trump's fundamental problem with the Venezuelan government isn't of any nature which says that there's an ideological problem at play. There's a problem with what the Venezuelan government is doing at home, which is at play. It's a plain simple thing. The Democrats should have done something which they haven't done. It should have been done a long time ago. You have just let them go on for that longer period of time. And the Venezuelan government is in power precisely because the Democrats haven't acted against it. So that was as bare and simple a basis on which the game started. Round 2 May, that's when Trump becomes president in 2024. The game starts acquiring a completely different sort of urgency altogether. For a simple reason, because one of the major contributors to Trump 2.0 are what are called as the American petrol firms. So, a large number of American oil majors कि जिन्होंने ट्रम्प के सेकेंड कैंपेन में बहुत सारा पैसा कंट्रीब्यूट किया था, और इनमें से कुछ लोग ऐसे हैं कि जिनको वेनेजुएला में इंटरेस्ट है, और उनका वेनेजुएला में इंटरेस्ट ये नहीं है जो ट्रम्प सर दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं फिलहाल, that we'll go for the oil, we'll take the oil out, we'll sell the oil in American markets, and thereby we will do something as far as Venezuelan oil is concerned. Venezuelan oil एक बहुत ही टेढ़ी किस्म की खीर है, and it's like an absolutely difficult sort of a thing, as I'll start talking about in a couple of minutes from now. Problem ये है कि ट्रम्प के सेकेंड कैंपेन में इसमें से बहुत सारे लोगों ने पैसा इन्वेस्ट किया था with the idea that we have lost money in Venezuela ever since the Hugo Chavez government came into power in 1999. So, 1999 May, when Hugo Chavez became the president of Venezuela for the first time, actually it happened in the last part of 98, so we normally look at it in 1998-99. जब Chavez पहली बार वेनेजुएला के प्रेसिडेंट चुन के आए थे, उसके बाद उन्होंने जो एक बहुत महान हरकत की थी was a lot of American and European oil majors operating in Venezuela for a fairly long period of time. इसमें से कुछ लोग जो है वो 1940s से ऑपरेट हो रहे हैं, कुछ लोग जो है वो 1970s में आए हैं after the 1970 oil shock. Some of them were recent entrants, like they had come in 1988, 89 and thereof when the Venezuelan government had called them in. इन सबके assets जो है वो वेनेजुएलन गवर्नमेंट ने नेशनलाइज कर दिए थे. सो द डिक्लेरेशन वाज all of this now is Venezuelan state property. It will belong to Venezuela's major public sector oil firm, PDVSA, and PDVSA will take over all these assets as far as these people are concerned. The Europeans were compensated to some extent at prices which were determined by the Venezuelan government. The Americans were told that this is the compensation that we are going to give you. अगर आपको लेना है तो आप लो, अगर आपको नहीं लेना है, you might as well go to hell. Okay. Just to give you an example, there is one of these big American oil majors which is called as ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is owed, according to ExxonMobil's own accounts and calculations and everything, $10 billion by the Venezuelan government. Now remember, this is $10 billion that is owed to ExxonMobil since 1999. put in the inflation, put in the interest rate, put in everything into it, and you know for sure that it's a huge amount of money that we are talking about. ओके सो ऐसे बहुत सारे फर्म्स है कि जिनको टेक्निकली 98 में जब वेनेजुएलन गवर्नमेंट ने इन ऑयल एसेट्स को नेशनलाइज किया तो उस टाइम पे कॉम्पेंसेशन ड्यू था और इनमें से काफी सारे फर्म्स को कॉम्पेंसेशन नहीं मिला फॉर अ सिंपल रीजन बिकॉज दे वर नॉट रेडी टू एक्सेप्ट द कॉम्पेंसेशन व्हिच वाज बीन गिवन टू देम बाय द वेनेजुएलन गवर्नमेंट. सो वेनेजुएलन गवर्नमेंट ने उनके कॉम्पेंसेशन के रेट्स डिसाइड किए और उनसे ये कहा कि देखिए ये प्राइस पे आपको कॉम्पेंसेशन मिलेगा, आपको लेना है तो लो, नहीं लेना है तो यू गेट लॉस्ट. Okay, most of them had to get lost. So they had nothing to do. They had to move on. The claims to the compensation stood. And they waited for that long, something like 2024 ka presidential election, to find an American candidate who would be ready to take up their cause. कि भाई हम आपको मदद तो करेंगे, पर आपको मदद करने के बाद आप हमको क्या दोगे? तो हमारा पैसा जो है जो वहां पे अटका हुआ है वी वांट दैट मनी बैक एंड दैट वाज द डील व्हिच वाज डन बिटवीन दीज अमेरिकन ऑयल मेजर्स एंड द ट्रम्प कैंपेन ग्रुप कि आप हमको मदद करोगे. दिस वाज लाइक रेडी कैश व्हिच वाज प्लेस्ड ऑन द टेबल एंड टन्स ऑफ मनी वाज प्लेस्ड ऑन द टेबल एंड इन एक्सचेंज फॉर इट व्हाट वाज सपोज्ड टू बी डन इज access to the Venezuelan oil fields, compensation which was due since 1998 would be delivered to us. And we would have a certain sort of a situation wherein we'll have operational freedom as far as the Venezuelan oil sector is concerned. Okay, now these were the terms on which they decided to help him. पैसा तो उन्होंने दिया, अब पेबैक का टाइम आ गया तो ट्रम्प साहब ने ये जो हरकत 3 जनवरी को किया वो हरकत किया. The most important question which has to be answered is why was this done at the time at which it was done? Though it was, as I said, in the offing for a fairly long period of time. So technically speaking ये 2019 से खेला हुआ खेल है तो ये अभी जाके जनवरी 2026 में ही especially in the first part of January 2026 ये exactly क्यों अंजाम दिया गया. Okay, so and that's also something that is what we leave pending for certain consideration down the line. But then to be very clear कि there are people in the American oil sector कि जिनके इंटरेस्ट बेसिकली इस कार्रवाई से सर्व होते हैं और जिनके इंटरेस्ट के लिए इस कार्रवाई को अंजाम देना बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी था. Okay, now along the line there are just a couple of problems which are very very interesting. The oil price as of now, like when Hugo Chavez came to power, oil was trading close to something like $60-70 a barrel. You have 9/11 happening, you have a major oil shock after that, oil suddenly starts escalating. What would sort of become a problem for the Manmohan Singh's second government in 2009 is what was great as far as the Venezuelan government is concerned. Oil starts trading at almost $140 a barrel sometime in the last part of the first decade of the 21st century. So somewhere around 2010, 2011, oil started going all the way up towards $140 a barrel. ये इंडिया जैसे ऑयल इंपोर्टिंग कंट्रीज के लिए डिजास्टर था, ये वेनेजुएला जैसे ऑयल एक्सपोर्टिंग कंट्रीज के लिए बोनंजा टाइम था. So this was like the most unbelievable time in their history that they could ever have imagined, that oil was trading at something like $140 a barrel. Even Venezuelan oil suddenly started becoming way too lucrative. Okay, उससे जो problem शुरू हो गए, that's a different story altogether. So Chavez dies in 2012. 2013 में Nicolas Maduro becomes the president of Venezuela. And that's the time when oil is almost trading at something like $140-145 per barrel. It's like a huge amount of money that you're talking about. And it won't be for almost the next whole decade that the oil price will start moderating. The price starts moderating towards the end of this decade. But then it plays out for the 110 plus wala situation for quite some period of time. ओके, अब प्रॉब्लम ये है कि जब ये सारी हरकत हुई है इन 2019 when Trump first promises the oil companies that I'll deal with your problem and I'll do something about it, that's also interestingly enough the time when the world's oil markets are now slowly getting flush with what is called as oil coming from new blocks. And two very interesting new blocks are located close to Venezuela. So one of Venezuela's neighbors is a country called as Guyana, which at the time when Hugo Chavez was in power, hardly had even 1 barrel of oil extraction, even 1 barrel of oil export. People were sure about the fact that Guyana possibly has a rich amount of oil deposits. It's just that we were not sure कि वो exactly कितना है, उसको निकालने के लिए आपको किस किस्म के इन्वेस्टमेंट्स की जरूरत है और वो कितना easily markets में लाके ट्रेड किया जा सकता है. The last decade changed everything of that. The second big block in the same region, which has been operational for quite some period of time, are what are called as the oil blocks in Brazil. So in this region, of course, Brazil and Guyana abhi OPEC ke members nahi hai. And of course, a lot of countries, especially the new ones on the block, are not interested in being a member of OPEC for a simple reason, because OPEC का member बनने का एक मतलब ये है कि आपके ऊपर बहुत सारे restrictions आते हैं in terms of आप exactly every day कितने तेल के लिए ड्रिल कर सकते हो, उसको किन प्राइसेस पे इंटरनेशनल मार्केट्स में उतार सकते हो और आपके प्रोडक्शन को आपको exactly किस तरह से कैलिब्रेट करना है. So the OPEC problem is, the minute you are a part of OPEC, it's like a collective decision being made by OPEC, and you'll have to fall in line as far as all of that is concerned. So that is a very difficult thing for a lot of the new kids on the block, Guyana, Brazil, and so on and so forth, who are very clear about this. We don't want those types of restrictions. We want a certain sort of operational autonomy and flexibility, which essentially means that we should be able to go about drilling for our own oil, deciding how much do we get to the market, and what are the prices that we go about selling it for. And of course, along the way, also deciding as to who exactly should the consumers be. So if you take that factor into consideration, the one small problem that the Trump White House has of now, and ये Trump White House का जो oil वाला gang है, उसका एक simple problem ये हुआ है, सर आज की तारीख में international markets में बहुत सारा oil पड़ा है. Tons of oil. As of now, while I'm talking to you, when this entire stupid thing happened, the amount of oil, the oil is trading at what is called as $62 a barrel. Imagine oil trading at $140 a barrel to oil trading now at $62 a barrel. And yet, Trump has an obsession for something which says that Americans at the pump should avail of oil which should be brought within the country, which is priced at $50 a barrel. So जो पेट्रोल पंप पे जाके अपनी कार में ऑयल भरवा रहा है, उसको ऑयल का प्राइस उस रेंज में होना चाहिए कि मानो अमेरिका $50 अ बैरल पे ऑयल इंपोर्ट कर रहा है. ओके, सो अभी भी एट $62 अ बैरल दे आर नॉट सेटिस्फाइड. They even now are looking for almost $10 to $12 a barrel per barrel ka price going down, so that they can go about trading at their fantasy price of $50 a barrel. The simple problem is, if you let the world carry on with the present situation in which the world is, if you let, say for example, OPEC go around playing with its production quotas, you might get oil even at $50 a barrel. दो जो बहुत ही सिग्निफिकेंटली सैंक्शनड कंट्रीज है आज की तारीख में, एक इंटरेस्टिंगली इनफ वेनेजुएला है, सेकंड इज ईरान. So the Iranians and the Venezuelans can bring their oil to the markets in a normal sort of a situation. You might end up with a situation where an oil can cost you actually $50 a barrel. Okay, so आज की तारीख में दुनिया का प्रॉब्लम ऑयल की अवेलेबिलिटी है ही नहीं. Okay, most of you might have heard about that fantastic figure of $300 billion barrels of oil, which is supposed to be what is called as Venezuela's total capacity as far as oil itself is concerned. So माना ये जाता है कि वेनेजुएला दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा पेट्रोल रिजर्व्स वाला कंट्री है. Almost 17% of the world's oil reserves are found in the territory of Venezuela. And how much is it that we are talking about? We are essentially talking about something like 300 billion barrels of oil. This is huge as compared to, say, for example, the second biggest country that we normally talk about, which is Saudi Arabia, which has a couple of billion barrels less than this. So the Venezuelans are supposed to, on paper, have something like 300 barrels of oil. The Saudis are supposed to have something like 295, 297 barrels of oil, a billion barrels of oil. So technically speaking, you are essentially talking of a situation wherein the Venezuelans top all the charts in terms of the potential reserves. So ये इसका उसका potential है कि 300 billion barrels is what is present in its water, what's present in its soil, what's present in its lakes, what's present in all the territory which forms what is called as Venezuela. एक simple problem ये है, lot of people connected with the oil trade actually believe that this is what is called as Venezuela's on paper potential. There's a very strong possibility the actual oil is possibly way too low than this. So maybe for a lot of people who are making those types of calculations, actually Venezuela का तेल शायद 50 या 100 बिलियन बैरल से इससे बहुत कम है. So जो आप 300 की बात कर रहे हो तो वो एक्चुअली इन रियलिटी या तो 200 है या 250 है. Okay, now how are you making such a big mistake as far as this calculation is concerned? उसका एक simple problem ये है, for almost the last 3 decades, Venezuela's oil fields have not been realistically prospected to find out कि उसका exactly potential है तो क्या है. So given the fact that the oil sector has suffered from all forms of mismanagement, from all forms of low levels of investment and technological innovation, the Venezuelan oil sector has this problem that we are realistically not in a position to say कि exactly हमारा potential है तो क्या है और exactly हमारे पास है तो कितना oil है. उसका simple reason ये है कि nobody has actually gone out in the field, made those test case वाले calculations and then gone about extrapolating it to find out कि exactly है तो बाहर कितना तेल बचा हुआ है. Okay, don't forget this. Venezuela has been drilling for oil since the 1940s. So the first time the Venezuelans started drilling for oil and Venezuela's oil was taken out and sold in the international markets was sometime in the 1940s. So you're essentially talking about oil which has been prospected for almost the last 100 odd years. So in the last 100 odd years, if you have gone about drilling for this commodity, you have obviously suffered some sort of an erosion as far as your actual stocks are concerned. But until and unless you don't prospect for it, until and unless you actually don't go out and start measuring it and calculating it, you're not in a position to say कि आपका exact potential कितना है, जमीन के नीचे exactly कितना तेल बचा हुआ है. You're just making a roundabout sort of an old calculation which says नहीं 300 billion barrels है. Okay, 300 billion barrels is not bad for a country जिसका total population 3.25 करोड़ है. On paper, Venezuela is South America's 3rd largest country as far as area occupied is concerned. At 3 crores, I don't know if it can strike you. It's almost what? 1/4 the population of the state of Maharashtra. So, पूरा Venezuela का population Maharashtra का 1/4 population है. And of course, that 3 crore is a very interesting population. That's a different story altogether. It's supposed to have the world's largest amount of oil reserves. It's supposed to have the world's 9th largest natural gas reserves. So the second big thing why Venezuela is extremely important is Venezuela is a very big country when it comes to exporting natural gas. And natural gas reserves, they are supposed to be the world's 9th largest. Okay. In addition to it, Venezuela sits on Latin America's largest gold deposits. So जितना सोना वेनेजुएलन सॉइल के अंदर है उतना सोना आपको पूरे लैटिन अमेरिका में किधर भी नजर नहीं आ सकता है. Conservatively speaking, that gold is worth something like 25 to 30 billion dollars. Okay, so in addition to it, there are a large range of other minerals. In addition to it, the Trump White House has been now trying to fool people with the idea that Venezuela possibly is extremely rich even in something called as rare earths, which is news to the Venezuelans for a simple reason because until and unless Trump didn't tell them about it, even they had no idea about it. But then there are a lot of people who don't have any idea about what they are all about until and unless Trump doesn't tell them about it. But that's a different story. So problem ये है कि Venezuela एक extremely rich country है. As far as a whole range of minerals are concerned, as far as a whole range of oil and gas reserves are concerned, it's an extremely beautiful country. So I don't know if you have ever had a chance to take a look at it. It's basically a tropical country with some extremely beautiful beaches, extremely rich countryside. It's a very colorful country. उसका एक ही प्रॉब्लम ये है, especially for people coming from other parts of the world, most of the year it can be unbearably hot. So the temperatures stay in their 30s for the best part of the year, given the fact that it's a country which is very close to the tropics. But then what makes human life difficult makes animal and plant life extremely easy. So it's a country which is very rich in forests. Some of the strongest, most durable and most powerful and beautiful forests is what you would find in Venezuela. Extreme diversity as far as animal, insect and bird life is concerned, making it an extremely interesting country from the tourism perspective. Except for the fact that in the last almost 2 decades, ever since the Bolivarian Republic was established, शुरू में तो टूरिस्ट आते थे, बहुत सारे आते थे. आज की तारीख में वो आते हैं, वो खाली कैराकस और उसके आसपास के एरियाज में घूमते हैं. Nobody goes out and takes a look into what is called as the Venezuelan wilderness, which is where most of this is present. Okay, so it's a country which has a phenomenal potential for leading an extremely great life. And yet what is very surprising, with 3 crore people, which is 1/4 of the population of Maharashtra, वेनेजुएला का पूरा मिला के जीडीपी जो है वो $250 billion है, which is exactly half of what Maharashtra's is. Okay, which is tragic given the fact that Maharashtra has no oil and gas. So, since you say you're a country which is sitting on oil and gas, then to have a GDP which is half of Maharashtra, which is tragic, very, very tragic. If you have that amount of oil and gas, then obviously you're supposed to be way too rich. But at $250 billion, it's like कुछ भी नहीं है. तो उसका काफी बड़ा पोटेंशियल है कि जो sort of unrealized है. And there are certain reasons why it is unrealized. And yet, mind you well, given the fact कि उसका 3 crore का population है, उसका per capita GDP जो है is very high as compared to even say for example all of India. So at per capita GDP, it's a country which has a per capita GDP which is close to $3,800, which is almost $1,000 more than $1,500 more than what we have in India. So even in its worst and most poor situation, it's slightly better off as compared to what we are in India. I don't know whether the Venezuelans should feel happy about it or should feel sad about it. But फिर भी, this is what the bare minimum fact of life is. 80 lakh log out of these 3 crore are what are called as displaced people and refugees. When they started seeking refuge in the middle part of the last decade, most of them went north towards North America, especially Mexico and the United States, because the natural direction of Venezuelan migration is towards America. But then as America started getting rocked by all these anti-immigration sort of fevers and fervors and everything, Venezuelans also started moving southwards towards countries like Chile, Brazil and Argentina. Most of the time when we make this calculation कि 80 लाख के आसपास का population refugees है, we don't take into consideration people who are in Colombia, which is Venezuela's next door country. ओके, सो कोलंबिया में रहने वाले वेनेजुएलन्स इस फिगर में नॉर्मली कैलकुलेट नहीं किए जाते हैं. उसका एक वजह ये है कि वो बहुत सारा वक्त दे कीप ऑन मूविंग बैक एंड फोर्थ. सो फॉर सम टाइम दे विल स्पेंड टाइम इन वेनेजुएला, एट टाइम्स दे विल गो टू कोलंबिया, and in that sort of a situation, given the fact that the borders are open, they keep on moving up and down. It's very difficult to say कि वो इधर है या उधर है. And that's the reason why most of the time they are not calculated in this figure of 80 lakh. 80 lakh का figure is about people who are far away from home. So either आप मेक्सिको में हो और या फिर आप अमेरिका में हो या फिर चिली में हो, बोलिविया या पेरू में हो. अगर आप इतना दूर गए हो तो ही आपको कैलकुलेट किया जाता है और तो ही we come with this figure of what is called as 80 lakhs. So for a country which is that rich, to have almost 1/3 of the country moving around as refugees and migrants, and most of these are economic migrants, and of course most of them are also people who are seeking political asylum, is something that is completely inexplicable. So जहां पे आपका इतना powerful potential है, जहां पे आप इतना कुछ कर सकते हो, ऐसी वाली सिचुएशन में आप माइग्रेंट्स हो, दर दर की ठोकरें खा रहे हो, इधर उधर घूम रहे हो, is something that just cannot be explained well. Okay, Trump and most of the MAGA Republicans are people who believe in this, that America has been taken over as far as most of its big cities are concerned by gangs of people who come from Latin America, and in some of the worst cases those gangs are headed by Venezuelans. So Trump keeps on looking at Venezuelans as outright thugs, people who are criminals, people who run all sorts of illegal criminal activities in America. One of the most colorful phrases which he'll throw at you is they are also rapists. Okay. For someone like him to call somebody else a rapist is very rich, but then anyway, he goes ahead and does that. So the whole problem is, as far as the Trump supporters, the MAGA Republicans, television channels which are run by them is concerned, America is sort of being run over by Venezuelan gangs. They are all over the place. They can literally sort of make you, they can convince you कि अगर आपने उनको support नहीं किया तो शायद आपको अगले आने वाले रोड के ब्लॉक पे कोई तो चाकू मार के खत्म करने वाला है, और वो चाकू किसी जिस हाथ में वो थमा होगा वो हाथ डेफिनेटली वेनेजुएलन है. And they have been doing this ever since they have come to power in 2024. He started with the idea that Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and those are the charges on which they are being tried in that New York court, are basically people who are running what is called as a narco-terrorism sort of operation in Venezuela, wherein they are trying to push for a large amount of drugs into the United States. Okay. Nobody wants to deny that Venezuela is part of the Latin American drug trade. The one small problem that we all have is, well, most of those drugs don't go north to America. Most of those drugs go east to West Africa, from where they travel to Europe. Venezuela is an extremely important country in the European drug trade. And those drugs make a very strange sort of a journey. So what they do is, the Venezuelan and the Brazilian cartels move drugs out of South America, which are mostly produced in countries like Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and so on and so forth. They are refined and are manufactured into all sorts of consumable products in either Venezuela or in Brazil. Then you have these small boats, which most of the time look like fishing boats going way far into the Atlantic, which keep crossing from these regions to what is called as West Africa. In West Africa, you have a couple of very fabulous countries. I don't know whether I should use that term, but nevertheless, I'll use it. So one, you have Guinea-Bissau. Second, you have Cape Verde. Third, you have Sao Tome and Principe. Most of them were what were called as Portuguese colonies. गिनी बिसाओ तो इतना महान कि उसकी महानता के बारे में क्या कहे. You have government officials who have been arrested by the Americans on charges of being involved in the drug trade. The last president was thrown out by his army अभी दिसंबर में. बहुत महान है वो, तुम सोच नहीं सकते. गिनी बिसाओ is supposed to be the most important country in the world when it comes to a country which has been disfigured by what is called as narco-terrorism. And one of the reasons is because practically everybody in the country at some level or the other is either impacted by it or is involved in it. So Latin American drugs cross over the Atlantic into West Africa. And from West Africa, most of the time they move into what is called as Southern and Eastern Europe. And that's the journey what they normally take. They're not interested in the American thing for a simple reason, because you have way too powerful cartels that operate the American drug trade. And these are not the people who are interested in it. The American drug trade is the preserve of what are called as the Caribbean gangs. So gangs coming from Central America, gangs coming from the Caribbean countries, well, those are the ones who are running that. There are a couple of Brazilians who are definitely involved in it, but the Venezuelans definitely not. According to the American government's own statistics and estimates, of all the drugs which are peddled in the United States, barely 4 to 5% comes from Venezuela. सो जहां पे 4 या 5% वेनेजुएला से आता है, उधर ये कहना कि आपका प्रेसिडेंट हमारे खिलाफ एक किस्म का नार्को वॉर में इन्वॉल्व है, इज लाइक फिनोमिनल. ओके, बट देन इन द ट्रम्प यूनिवर्स, practically everything which otherwise would be considered as imaginary is something that is real. So you can't help it. Okay, so he started it off by saying that Nicolas Maduro is involved in a drug war against the United States. They're involved in unleashing narco-terrorism against the United States. And that's the reason why we want to take them out. He takes him out, he takes him to New York, he puts him on trial. Now we don't know as to what are the New York judges going to do. He is entitled to what is called as a trial by jury. So the trial has already got started. When it will be finally finished, now the 4 charges which have been labeled against him, उसमें से शायद एक भी चार्ज ऐसा नहीं है जो प्रोसिक्यूशन एटलीस्ट ऑन द फेस ऑफ इट सब्सटैंशियली किसी भी तरीके से प्रूव कर सकता है. सो काफी गुंजाइश है इस बात की कि ये आदमी अ कपल ऑफ मंथ्स डाउन द लाइन इज पॉसिबली गोइंग टू बी रिलीज्ड बाय द कोर्ट्स, दो वी आर नॉट वेरी श्योर अबाउट इट. ओके, the most interesting part of the whole story is, so long as Maduro did not land in New York, Trump kept up with the idea कि ये drug trade है. The minute Maduro came to New York, Trump started talking about oil. And obviously, anyone who understands the whole equation knows this for sure that oil and drugs ये synonymous words नहीं है. मतलब ड्रग्स ड्रग्स होते हैं, ऑयल ऑयल होता है. ये दो कंप्लीटली अलग किस्म की कमोडिटीज है. मतलब मैं ऐसा नहीं कर सकता हूं कि मैं ड्रग्स के लिए उसको ऑयल कहूं या ऑयल को ड्रग्स कहूं. ओके, सो यू बिगैन द गेम विद ड्रग्स. एट सम लेटर पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम यू सडनली स्विच्ड ऑन टू समथिंग कॉल्ड एज ऑयल. एंड नाउ द ट्रम्प व्हाइट हाउस मेक्स नॉट वन मेंशन ऑफ समथिंग दैट इज कॉल्ड एज ड्रग्स. ऑल दैट दे आर टॉकिंग अबाउट इज ऑयल. How much oil can we get from Venezuela? How much oil are the Venezuelans going to send us? What are we going to do with that oil? And so on and so forth. So it's like suddenly the most important question is, sir, वो ड्रग्स का क्या हो गया? तो जैसे हमारे बिहार में हुआ था अभी कुछ दिन पहले, वो चूहे गांजा खा के खत्म कर दिए उसको. बिहार में नहीं, वो झारखंड में हुआ था, सॉरी. 200 किलो गांजा चूहों ने खाया है. तो जज का प्रॉब्लम ये है कि सर एविडेंस ही नहीं है. वो कह रहे हैं कि उन्होंने 200 किलो गांजा एप्रिहेंड किया था, और ये 200 किलो गांजा एप्रिहेंड करने के लिए दीज आर पीपल हु आर बीन ट्राइड इन अ कोर्ट. एंड नाउ द कोर्ट सिंपल प्रॉब्लम इज, द प्रोसिक्यूशंस पॉइंट इज, सर गांजा चूहा खा गया. तो अगर गांजा चूहा खा गया और गांजा है ही नहीं, तो फिर इस बेचारे को किस चीज के लिए प्रोसिक्यूट किया जा रहा है? So something similar is, I believe, what is afoot in Venezuela, though you have to wait and watch for it. Now, 2 small problems with that Venezuelan oil problem. One, Venezuelan crude is what is called as heavy. In the language of crudes, it's supposed to be heavy, it's supposed to be bitter. It is not like Saudi crude, which is light and sweet. Now, जब हम ये टर्म्स ऑयल इंडस्ट्री में यूज करते हैं, तो उसका सीधा संबंध जो है वो उसके रिफाइनिंग से है. हैवी क्रूड्स, हैवी एंड बिटर क्रूड्स जो होते हैं, उसको रिफाइन करने के लिए आपको बहुत मेहनत करनी पड़ती है. बहुत अलग अलग किस्म की टेक्नोलॉजी उसमें काम आती है. एंड according to the effort as well as the technologies involved in it, you also have to make a lot of investments in it. Lighter crudes, on the other hand, enjoy the benefit of what is called as low levels of technology that go into refining them, and hence you need a lower investment when it comes to refining them. So lighter crudes are more easier in terms of being refined and brought to the market quickly. Heavier crudes have this problem that you need to put them through a lot of effort in terms of refining them. It takes a lot of time to get them to the market as compared to a similar quantity of lighter crude that comes to the market. And you also require a lot of money as far as your investments when it comes to refining them is concerned. Okay, so Venezuelan crude का एक simple problem for a lot of American oil companies is, so the crude is way too expensive when it comes to getting it to the market. So उसको ड्रिलिंग से मार्केट लाने की स्टेज में आपको बहुत सारा पैसा इन्वेस्ट करना पड़ता है. वो एक बहुत ही टेक्निकली इन्वेस्टमेंट रिच किस्म का एक्टिविटी है. और उसका एक सिंपल प्रॉब्लम ये है, अगर गलती से भी वेनेजुएला में गवर्नमेंट चेंज हो गया, हमारे सारे इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लान्स जो है ना वो धरे के धरे रहने वाले हैं. So this is what Americans have experienced for almost 2 different cycles in the last century. Ki they go into Venezuela, they invest in the country, they start drilling, they get the oil out, they start refining, they get it to the market. There's a lot of money which comes Venezuela's way. It brings in a lot of social inequality. Down the line, you have a change of government, and the new government decides that the best way of dealing with all these things is to throw out the Americans and to start nationalizing everything. Not many American companies are now interested in the game for a very simple reason, because according to most estimates, with at least the developed world, we are at an inflection point as far as energy is concerned. We are rapidly moving towards energy transition, which essentially means that in a couple of years, you're going to have so much of energy coming through the renewable way कि जमीन के नीचे जो तेल है उसको उधर पड़े रहने देना ही आपके लिए समझदारी का काम है. So you needn't go about drilling for it. You needn't do anything about it for a simple reason, because renewables are available in the market for a very less amount of price in large quantities. I'm saying this is the fact as far as the developed world is concerned. I am not talking about India over here at all. So as far as most developed countries are concerned, a very conscious push towards the energy transition by both society, corporates, governments, everyone essentially means you are rapidly moving towards that world wherein, as what one of those Saudi oil ministers once upon a time had said, the Stone Age did not end because stones came to an end, and the oil age is not going to end because oil comes to an end. The oil age is going to end because technologies are going to change. You're going to have new ways of doing things. The oil will stay in the ground and we will move on. And this was a Saudi oil minister who said this in the 1980s, almost 4 decades ago, before Mohammed bin Salman started doing the sort of things which he has now been doing. So we have been looking at this horizon for the last almost 30, 40 odd years. And given the fact that you are rapidly approaching it, for most oil companies who are in this business, their fundamental problem is Trump बोल रहा है इसके लिए जाने में कोई फायदा ही नहीं है सर. हम जाएंगे, पैसा लगाएंगे. कल को अगर वेनेजुएला में फिर से गवर्नमेंट बदल गया, and if it goes about nationalizing everything, we are going to end up like ExxonMobil once again, wherein we'll have a huge amount of demands to make, and we're going to find there is nobody in Caracas who is even ready to pick up the phone. So this makes no sense. B, the other part of Trump's support gang, big tech, that needs a huge amount of energy as far as new age technologies, especially of the artificial intelligence variety are concerned, also have this problem that they cannot source this from oil. So most big techs who are involved in AI and machine learning and allied activities need to run huge data centers, need a vast amount of energy for it, are also people who are very clear about this. This energy cannot come from oil. ये energy invariably renewables से आना है, for a simple reason, because AI applications और AI products को इस्तेमाल करने वाला जो customer है, जो consumer है, वो बहुत ज्यादा green energy conscious है. उसका सबसे fundamental problem ये है कि अगर आप उसको ये बोलो कि ये AI लाया गया था tons of कोयला जला के, there's a very strong possibility he's going to go around boycotting you. So you don't need that sort of energy coming from oil. So Trump जितना भी तेल वेनेजुएला से उठाएगा, if at all वो उठाएगा तो वो तेल definitely energy production में नहीं जाने वाला है. वो तेल at the most transportation में जाएगा. So the fundamental issue which they have is a very simple one. New age technologies which are energy intensive, highly energy intensive. So average American data centers have this problem that वो जिधर भी located है, वो उसके आसपास का जो energy demand है और energy का जो pricing है, they have been responsible for it getting escalated by something like 200% in just the last 3 to 4 years. So starting off from 2022, when COVID-19 के second round of restrictions came to a close, AI development has a spur after that. And just the last 3 years, new data centers have been responsible for pushing up the demand for energy by close to 200%, pushing up the prices of energy by close to 200%. These are energy intensive activities. They need a huge amount of energy. But at the same time, their fundamental problem is ये एनर्जी फॉसिल फ्यूल्स जला के नहीं आएगी, क्योंकि फॉसिल फ्यूल्स वाली ग्रिड्स अनरिलायबल है, इनकंसिस्टेंट है, उतने बड़े स्केल पे एनर्जी डिलीवरी नहीं कर सकती है. ये एनर्जी आएगी थ्रू व्हाट इज कॉल्ड एज रिन्यूएबल्स. सो सैड पार्ट ऑफ द होल स्टोरी इज if nobody wants that oil, and if the Maduros are not involved in drugs, then what was this all about? अच्छा, वेनेजुएलन ऑयल का गए ऑलमोस्ट 15-20 साल का सबसे बड़ा कस्टमर जो था वो चाइना है. Ever since Xi Jinping came to power in 2013 as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese have invested close to $100 billion in Latin America. 100 billion. जिसमें से 60 billion have been invested in a single country which is called as Venezuela. और इस इन्वेस्टमेंट के एवज में बीजिंग को जो मिलता था was access to Venezuela's oil and gas. There was nothing that Beijing was getting out of this equation. Beijing invested heavily in the sense that, as I said, 100 billion पूरे कॉन्टिनेंट में लगाया है, जिसमें से खाली 60 बिलियन एक ही कंट्री में लगा है जिसका नाम वेनेजुएला है. अच्छा, ह्यूगो चावेज केम बैक with a lovely idea in December which said that the Americans cannot break through my communications because Xi Jinping has given me a Huawei phone. और वो हुआई वाला फोन जो है वो उसको सारे प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंसेस में लेके घूमता था, वो उसको सब जगहों पे नचाता था विद द आइडिया दैट लुक आई हैव अ वेरी सिक्योर लाइन ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन एंड दिस हुआई फोन आई एम जस्ट इम्यून टू एनी सॉर्ट ऑफ टैम्पिंग ऑफ माय कम्युनिकेशंस बाय द अमेरिकans. The detailed story is being awaited, but it seems that it's the Huawei that gave away on the 3rd of January in terms of इस आदमी का एग्जैक्ट लोकेशन क्या है. And the second sad part of the whole story is, in the last minute of this entire operation, Maduro and his Venezuelan military officers were busy trying to fire a couple of Chinese missiles at the American planes, all of which sort of did not work. So sad part of the whole story. And is China ready to go to war against the United States about this? Sadly enough, Beijing has protested it the loudest, but it seems Beijing beyond protest is not interested in anything. So उसने सबसे ज्यादा आवाज किया है, and especially वो आवाज खलता है when you take this factor into consideration that the Europeans have hardly squeaked. So in that sort of a situation, the strongest protesters against Trump's actions have been the Chinese. But are they ready to go to war? आपकी सबसे ज्यादा इन्वेस्टमेंट वाली कंट्री अफेक्ट हुई है, आपका सबसे ज्यादा तेल जहां से आता था that has got affected. In the last stages, these were vessels carrying petroleum from Venezuela bound for China, which were being targeted and attacked by the Trump American forces. Are you going to stand up? They're your friends, they're your allies. The Chinese thing is, देखेंगे, फिलहाल तो कुछ नहीं करेंगे. उसका सबसे बड़ा वजह यह है, $60 billion is petty charge. The America-China trade is almost 3 to 4 times that. So are we ready to sort of bring our relations with the Americans into trouble because of something called as Venezuela, whose president has already fallen? The Chinese are very clever people. They are never going to do that. Never. The only small thing which they are doing is they are trying to find out the legality of all of this. कि ये सारा जो झमेला हुआ है इसका लीगल एंगल क्या है. So that in the second part of 2026, mind you well, I have been time and again telling you in these sessions, Xi Jinping is definitely going to do something against Taiwan in 2026 itself. It has to happen in 2026 for a simple reason, because in 2027, the Chinese People's Congress would be meeting to confirm whether Xi should be given one more extension in power. So, given the fact that वो meeting 2027 में होना expected है, whatever Xi has to do about Taiwan has to happen in 2026. So, what the Xi gang is doing in Beijing is busy studying this entire situation with the idea that if Trump can keep Venezuela by imposing himself in Venezuela's internal affairs, can we do something similar in Taiwan? Of course, the Trump White House's point is, you can as well go to hell. We are not interested. Because if you do anything about Taiwan, it's basically Japan, South Korea, Philippines and Southeast Asia's problem. तू हमको क्यों पूछ रहा है कि क्या होने वाला है? तू पहले जाके उनसे बात कर. फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस जो है वो जापान, साउथ कोरिया एंड फिलीपींस है. फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस ऑब्वियसली यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स को इन्वॉल्व नहीं करता है. एटलीस्ट दैट इज द व्हाइट हाउस थिंकिंग एज ऑफ नाउ. So if tomorrow if Xi decides to take on Taiwan, Trump is just going to make noises, not going to act against it. Action आएगा जापान से, action आएगा साउथ कोरिया से, action आएगा फिलीपींस से, because these would be the countries that would be the most affected if China eats away Taiwan. Okay, उसके बाद क्या करना है वो हम सोचेंगे. So their point is कि like फिलहाल हम कुछ नहीं करने वाले हैं, जो भी करेगा वो ये लोग करेंगे. And that is what they are more keen on. The Kremlin is more keen on this, कि like if you can keep Venezuela, can I keep Ukraine, at least the Donbas part of it? कम से कम उतना तो रहेगा मेरे पास. So everyone is busy thinking about this. अपन क्या क्या grab कर सकते हैं, किधर किधर से उठा सकते हैं, if this can become a legal sort of a precedence. Okay, it's the saddest moment as far as international politics of a certain type is concerned. So as I was explaining this to somebody the other day around, I don't know how many of you would recollect all those old stories, but let me just churn out a couple of them just to make a certain sort of a point. ये कहा जाता है कि जब अलेक्जेंडर ने ये नॉर्थ ईस्ट इंडिया पे अटैक किया, आई एम टॉकिंग ऑफ अलेक्जेंडर द ग्रेट, he goes about defeating a number of kings over here, and one of these kings, which the Greeks say is a man called as Porus, is brought before him as a captive. And Alexander asks him this question, like, how do you want me to treat you? And Porus says that just as a king should treat a king. Okay, now in this simple story, what is implicit is Porus is a king who has been defeated in a war by Alexander. In the pre-modern world, a king defeated was completely at the mercy of the victorious king. So वो आपके साथ कुछ भी कर सकता था. वो आपका रायता बना सकता है, वो आपके कोफ्ते बना सकता है, वो आपका कबाब बना सकता है, वो आपकी बिरयानी बना सकता है, वो आपका हलीम बना सकता है, वो आपका कुछ भी कर सकता है. वो आपको शायद कच्चा भी निगल सकता है. आ रहा है समझ में? या फिर as Alexander does in this case, highly impressed by this answer, he says, okay, you go, you rule your territory, you will pay me a tribute and stay subordinate to me, but then you can go and rule your people as a free king. There's turmoil in Alexander's armies after this for completely different reasons. The king has to go back home because the armies are tired of this continuous war. And his simple problem was कि like थोड़ा और गए होते towards the point where the Ganga empties into the sea, we might have ended up capturing the whole world. Because that was the idea of geography that Alexander had. कि जहां पे गंगा समुद्र से मिलती है वहां पे दुनिया खत्म हो जाती है. That is what the earth is all about. So his simple problem was थोड़ा आगे गए होते तो maybe we would have ended up becoming the people who captured the world. But then since you all are not interested, we might as well go home. They go home, he dies in Babylon, the story is over there. But then across time, You have hundreds of cases wherein defeated kings have been dealt very harshly by victorious kings. So you have the celebrated case of LR in Sri Lanka defeated by Dattagamini, कि जिसमें वो उसको हाथी के पैरों से उड़ा देता है. Then you have the last caliph of Baghdad being rolled up in a carpet and being killed under horses' hooves when Genghis Khan takes over Baghdad. Then you have, how many can I keep on listing over here? Tons of them. बहुत boring है वो, पर बहुत सारे हैं ऐसे कि जिसमें defeated king is, now what I mean by a king over here is he's sovereign. So he is the supreme lord of the territory and the country that he goes about governing. In a state of war, जहां पे the opposite side has defeated you, you are completely at the mercy of the opposite side. जीतने वाला शायद आपको अच्छा भी ट्रीट कर सकता है, पर काफी केसेस में जीतने वाला आपके साथ बहुत हार्श ट्रीटमेंट करता है. You are personally sort of dealt in the harshest way possible, with the idea that the personage and the lineage of the king, the defeated king, has to be completely finished off. You have Rajendra Chola's case in the case of the Solan Empire, where he goes conquering the Bengal territories and gets all the defeated kings to carry silver vessels on their heads full of Ganga water, so that the tank at this place called the Gangaikonda Solpuram could be filled up with the waters of the Ganga. So you have tons of those types of examples. When did we change this? Sometime in the 17th century, when you move into a situation of what is called as nation states, with the idea that a sovereign king, even if he is defeated, is ultimately a sovereign of his territories, and somehow or the other, until and unless you don't take over those territories, you are not supposed to go about dealing with him in a wrong manner. So वो अपने टेरिटरी का सॉवरेन है, वो भले ही हारा होगा आपके साथ युद्ध में, पर जब तक आप उसकी टेरिटरी को खत्म नहीं करते हो, तब तक आप उसके साथ किसी भी तरीके का गलत जो व्यवहार है वो नहीं कर सकते हो. बट मोस्ट ऑफ दिस वाज डेल्ट ऑफ ऑन द बैटलफील्ड इटसेल्फ. वी नेवर वेटेड फॉर दैट नेक्स्ट ओकेजन. वी यूज्ड टू नॉर्मली गो अबाउट किलिंग द किंग्स ऑन द बैटलफील्ड्स इटसेल्फ. Things will change in 1940s after the end of the Second World War, when we enter into a situation which says this, that states are equal to each other. Okay? And most states should not interfere in the internal affairs of other states. So we in India are well known of these principles through that idea of what is called as the Panchsheel. The idea which says this, that states sovereign hai, states equal hai. So the world system is made up of what are called as states which are equal to each other. आपका geographical size छोटा या बड़ा हो सकता है, but that doesn't mean that in the international system you go about enjoying what is called as a more superior position over some other state. You are more or less equal to each other. And as far as is possible, you are not going to go about interfering in somebody's internal affairs. So वो उनके देश के अंदर क्या कर रहे हैं ना, this has to be dealt off by the politics of the country itself. Don't deal off with it in a unilateralist manner. Don't deal off in it in a manner wherein it seems that you're interfering in somebody's internal affairs. Okay, something that most countries in Asia are very wary of. So time and again the Chinese will tell you that Tibet is an internal matter of China, and we just don't want anybody else from outside China to go about interfering in the same. The Indians repeat the same position when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, so these are internal matters. These should not be interfered by other states. You should not take recourse to any extra legal mechanisms to go about influencing the politics as far as these territories are concerned. Okay, एक प्रॉब्लम ये है कि अमेरिका ने खुद के लिए एक एक्सेप्शन इस सिचुएशन में क्रिएट किया है. Almost 120 years before the United Nations goes about accepting these principles as far as the functioning of the United Nations is concerned. And this is what is called as the famous Monroe Doctrine of the 1820s. named after the then American president James Monroe. Monroe Doctrine बहुत बार इस पूरे क्राइसिस में रिपीट किया गया है, बहुत बार उसको बार बार एक तरह से मेंशन किया है. Nobody makes the efforts to mention this. When it came about in the 1820s, उसका एक अलग किस्म का पॉलिटिक्स था, उसका एक अलग किस्म का पर्पस था, और वो एक अलग ही किस्म की दुनिया के बारे में था. So the Monroe Doctrine of the 1820s makes this point that the American continent is about American people. Okay, we don't want anybody from outside the Americas to go about interfering in the politics of the Americas. We don't want them to bring their wars into our territories. So sort of the United States is making this point clear that as far as the American continent, I'm saying the American continent, what it essentially means is everything starting off from Canada going down towards Argentina is what the US by this doctrine goes about reserving for itself as the legitimate sort of zone of its interest and the legitimate sort of zone of protecting its peoples from all sorts of external wars. Now, the reason why this doctrine comes up is plain and simple. The largest empire in Latin America is Spain. The Spanish Empire starts crumbling in the 1820s for a simple reason, because Spain lands in trouble in Europe on account of the wars that Spain involves itself against Napoleon. Okay, the region which is called as Venezuela goes free from Spanish colonialism in 1820 as part of something that is called as Gran Colombia. A huge federation that comprises of Colombia, Panama, parts of Bolivia, parts of Brazil, and all of Venezuela. Okay, ये होता है on the backdrop of the Napoleonic wars in Europe, and their problem is what's happening in Europe should stay in Europe. Don't bring those wars over here. तुम्हारा उधर का झोल तुम उधर ही सुलझाओ, तुम उसको लेके इधर उसको सब लाके हमारे लिए एक परेशानी खड़ी मत करो. So the Monroe Doctrine was essentially about a completely different world altogether. That world disappeared a long time ago. And yet, funnily enough, America reserves to itself the right to military action in the American continent. So the idea is, पूरे एरिया में कुछ भी अगर होता है जो हमारे इंटरेस्ट के खिलाफ जाता है, तो हम डेफिनेटली उसमें इंटरफियर करेंगे. हम यकीनन उसमें किसी ना किसी किस्म की एक्टिविटीज करेंगे जिससे हम हमारे इंटरेस्ट को प्रोटेक्ट करेंगे. सो दे हैव बीन डूइंग दिस फॉर द लास्ट ऑलमोस्ट, इफ यू ट्राई रियलिस्टिकली अंडरस्टैंडिंग इट, 200 years. तुम्हारा यूनाइटेड नेशंस वाला आइडिया कि स्टेट सॉवरेन है, स्टेट्स इक्वल है, states are the zones of their politics and shouldn't bear anybody else's politics into it. Well, that's just the last 75 odd years, as opposed to 200 years of history and precedence, wherein the Americans have always emphasized that they have a priority sort of right when it comes to interfering in the matters of all the countries in the continent. सुनने में बहुत मजेदार लगता है, एस्पेशली वो अगर आपको स्टूपिड इंडियन टेलीविजन चैनल समझाने की कोशिश कर रहे हो तो बहुत ही मजेदार है. सो देयर हैव बीन वेरी फनी पीपल इन इंडिया हु हैव बीन ट्राइंग टू टेल ईच अदर कि जो ट्रंप ने वहां पे किया, वी शुड बी डूइंग समथिंग सिमिलर टू दैट इन द एशियन सबकॉन्टिनेंट. So people have been asking about when is Modi going to go to Pakistan and going to go about picking up people in Pakistan. है ना? धुरंधर में रणवीर की भी दाढ़ी थी, सांप की भी दाढ़ी है. कर सकते हैं सर, क्या करें? They have been trying to find out, can we do something similar in Bangladesh, given the fact that is the new target that we have found for ourselves to go about using as a punching bag. Let the Nepal elections get completed and you would find people asking the same question about Nepal. The only country that they don't want the Prime Minister to go to is Afghanistan as of now. So they don't want anybody to go to Kabul and pick up anybody, but they're definitely interested in picking up all of this. इसका एक simple problem ये है जो काफी हद तक जैसे मैंने कहा, इंडिया में ना तो मेंशन किया जाता है और ना ही कंसिडर किया जाता है. The American continent is full of people who are instinctively anti-America. Ask yourself this question. 3rd of January को वेनेजुएलन प्रेसिडेंट निकाला गया है. ट्रंप ये कह रहा है कि वी आर गोइंग टू रन दिस कंट्री. There is no American soldier on the ground. There is no American official on the ground in Venezuela who is trying to govern the country on behalf of Donald Trump. And the simple question which you have is, why is that not happening? If you are saying that I'm going to run the country, Trump has said it in so many words. America is going to run Venezuela till we cannot ensure of a smooth, peaceful transition. ये एक indefinite किस्म का phrase है because it essentially means that nobody knows when this is going to happen. But then if this has to happen, you have got to be on the ground over there. Your soldiers have got to be on the ground over there. There is nobody on the ground over there. Maduro gaya. The Venezuelan Supreme Court declared that his deputy president, this woman called as Delcy Rodriguez, would become the next president because she is the deputy. And given the fact that now there is no president, according to the constitution, the deputy president becomes the president. Delcy Rodriguez बहुत funny character है. She is a very powerful anti-American voice in the government. She is the daughter of a person who once upon a time was responsible for kidnapping a very senior American official and then causing his death. The Venezuelan government is full of those types of characters. But then the Trump point is, we never told you that we are going to run Venezuela according to the principles of free speech, free assembly, freedom and liberty. No, nothing. हमको खाली मदुरो को उड़ाना था. इसको कौन कंट्रोल करेगा? The Venezuelan army continues in its position for a simple reason, because Donald Trump is very conscious of something called as negative images. His fundamental problem is, if you send an army contingent to Venezuela, if it gets attacked by the Venezuelans, if you have American soldiers and officials getting killed on the streets of Caracas, those types of images are going to become very negative as far as your image is concerned in the United States. You don't want those types of images. And everyone knows, हवा से आप कितना भी बमबारी करो, जब तक आप on the ground situation को neutralize नहीं करते हो, तब तक you are not in control of anything. Ask the Ukrainians and the Russians, they have been doing that हवा से बमबारी वाला idea for the last 3 years. अभी 4 हो जाएगा. गए 4 साल से ड्रोन खेल रहे हैं और किधर भी नहीं जा रहे. This doesn't work. You need what is called as boots on the ground. You need people to get on the ground and go about neutralizing the opposite position. It's only then that you can declare that, well, we have captured this. He knows it well. Most Latin Americans are instinctively anti-America. Instinctively. आपको कुछ भी नहीं करना पड़ता है. Just by being born a Spanish or a Portuguese speaking Latin American, you almost learn a certain sort of anti-America language while you're growing up. You learn anti-America attitudes while you're growing up. Even if you get into the United States for purposes of education and employment, you carry on with that anti-Americanism even in your life in the United States. Latin Americans never give up on this for a simple reason, because average common Latin Americans permanently believe the continent has always been scarred by what the United States has gone about doing with us for the last 2 centuries. So most Latin Americans is There are multiple civil wars, Janvi. It's not just one civil war. There are so many civil wars. There are civil wars across the continent. So in practically all sorts of situations, you are going to find that the Americans go about supporting a certain side. Most of the time, it's the most conservative elements of your society that they go about supporting. Trump has perfected the playbook. अब इसके पहले वाले लोग तो कम से कम used to think in terms of military intervention, putting boots on the ground, supplying them with what is called as military assistance. Trump तो उसमें से कुछ भी नहीं करता है. Trump writes checks. He writes checks. He threatens countries with tariffs. He talks about something which says that you would have a better sort of a situation in terms of trading with us, and you get a government that is changed on the ground in Latin America. He did this during the Argentinian elections, which happened last year, कि जिसमें after the ruling party, which was the pro-Trump side, seemed to be losing elections, he simply told the entire country a very simple thing. If you support my people, I am going to go about investing $40 billion in Argentina, which is a huge sum of money for that poor country. Huge. So, हारने वाला side 15 दिन के बाद, when the votes are tallied, ends up with 40% more votes. Argentina, we normally look at it as a joke. $1 billion for 1% increase in votes. He did the same thing in the Honduran presidential elections just in the last stages of December, where he signaled that this candidate is my man. The man won. You don't need to put boots on the ground. You don't need any sort of military intervention. You just have got to go public with an idea which says this, that तुम मेरे आदमी को चुनो, मैं तुम्हारे यहां पे पैसा ही पैसा बरसाएगा. And what you get is a favorable outcome in favor of the candidates that Donald Trump goes about supporting. Something that most Indian channels are not taking into consideration. They are eagerly waiting for this. That Trump is going to go about invading Venezuela. Whereas it's not going to happen. They are not going to put a single regiment on the ground. They are not going to do anything of that. They want to keep on playing a very deft game. And so long as Caracas responds to it, they are not worried about who is running Caracas. He is not worried about let the Maduro people who are now in charge go about killing the Venezuelans. They can do whatever they want. We are least interested in that. Least. ये फेज शुरू होता है 1990s में with this man called as Hugo Chavez, who was a young junior level army officer in the Venezuelan army, who first tries changing the government by a military coup, lands in trouble, goes to jail, comes out, and in 1998 goes about contesting the elections and getting elected to high office. So he becomes the president. He declares a new republic, which is called the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and he aligns himself with the Cuban government. That's the reason why Trump has warned the Cubans, the Mexicans, and the Colombians, watch up your asses, you are the next ones in the line. So Cuba in सबका ideological fountainhead है. Okay, the Cubans are a communist revolution. Chavez comes into power when Fidel Castro is yet alive. Fidel Castro has a problem of Cuba has no oil and no energy resources of its own. Venezuela supplies it with oil. And in exchange, what the Cubans send to Venezuela is gangs upon gangs of trained Cubans who are extremely skilled and talented in what is called as human development. They're the best doctors, some of the best and finest teachers, some of the best managers as far as public services are concerned. पर इन सब characters का एक ही small common चीज है, they are very high on a certain idea of communism. They are very high on something that is called as revolution. And they're very high on an idea called as we have got to take on the Americans and we have got to do everything possible to somehow or the other neutralize them. So the game gets started in 1998. sometime in the middle of the first decade of the 21st century, Chavez starts showing signs of physical decline. And in 2012, he's gone. The lingering doubt that we have is the CIA had gone about in some way or the other, infiltrating his inner ring, and they had gone about slow poisoning him. So he develops a range of cancers which keep getting detected late, and which unfortunately at the end of the day are responsible for his death and decline. And you could visibly see him decline. Now, Chavez, like Trump in his times, was an extremely popular personality when it came to using radio and television to put his message across. So anyone watching his television shows could detect it that the president is declining. He's becoming sick from an extremely stout, well-built army officer. You start becoming extremely frail to the point that you're finally dead and gone. 2013 में ये रजनीकांत जो है, जिसको निकोलस मादुरो कहते हैं, वो प्रेसिडेंट बना. वो शावेज का डेप्यूटी प्रेसिडेंट था, और डेप्यूटी प्रेसिडेंट बनने के पहले वो काराकस की बसेस में कंडक्टर था. And that was a huge leap for somebody who started off from the public transportation system and went all the way to becoming the president of the country. By the middle of the second decade of the 21st century, it had started becoming clearer that Maduro has no better ideas of running the country except for abusing the United States. So day in and day out, so आप समझ सकते हो, मदुरो का नेहरू जो था वो अमेरिका था. वो कुछ भी नहीं करने का है. सुबह शाम उठ के नेहरू ने ये किया, नेहरू ने वो किया, नेहरू ऐसा था, नेहरू वैसा था. Replace Nehru with United States of America and you get how was Maduro running Venezuela. The oil wealth was getting squandered off. There was unbelievable corruption all over the place. Public finances were gone ekdam haywire and wild. And he had a simple answer to everything. Well, the Americans have gone about sanctioning everything. मैं करूँ तो क्या करूँ? A profound anti-Americanism. Of course, Chavez had the same, but Chavez also had a very strong commitment and concern for the average Venezuelan down out in the slums, in the remotest of villages and valleys across the country. Maduro, it seemed, had abandoned all of it. You ask me questions and I'm going to hit you. That was the only answer which he had. By 2017-18, you had large numbers of Venezuelans who had a very simple option in life. You have got to leave the country if you want to survive. Remember those 2 lakh Indians who have forfeited their passports and Indian citizenship? Something similar. खाली ये बहुत अमीर लोग हैं, और वेनेजुएला में वो जो 70 लाख थे who left the country, they most of the time walked out of the country because they did not have a car or anything. They were very poor people. आ रहा है समझ में? In India, the rich can afford to go. In Venezuela, the poor are forced to go. So I don't know, how do you look at that? I mean, you're in a very funny situation. I need to answer that very small, simple question. Why now? जब ये इतने सालों से चल रहा था, जब आपको मालूम था कि बिडेन और डेमोक्रेट्स ने उसको कंप्लीटली एक तरह से मैसअप कर दिया है, आपने इतना वक्त क्यों लिया? तो उसका बहुत सिंपल आंसर ये है, 2026 is the year of the American midterm elections. By September, October, America will have gone into election mode. That is not the time when you can go and do something like this. Of course, nobody is ruling out that Trump is not going to roll out more such adventures across 2026. He's threatening people right, left, and center. So as I said, he has threatened the Colombians, he has threatened the Mexicans, he has threatened the Cubans. He has threatened Denmark over something called as Greenland, which is a more profound problem. He has gone about getting bills passed in the American Congress which are going to go about increasing the tariffs on the Indians from 50 to 500. So much for abki baar Trump ki sarkar. So the fundamental problem is very simple. Thanksgiving 2025, which is November 2025, is when most Americans who first went out to the supermarkets to start making festival sales started realizing that the prices of most essential commodities are possibly way too beyond your means. Most people gave in with the hope that maybe Thanksgiving का problem है, Christmas अच्छा जाएगा. By the time you went and started doing your Christmas purchases, you started realizing the problem is the same. The retail chains blamed the Trump tariffs for it. So the problem was, during the most important festivals of the year, for most Americans, the most important festivals of the year are from Thanksgiving to New Year. You found that most prices of absolutely essential commodities, flour, sugar, eggs, are things which are way beyond your control. You have a president who keeps on talking bullshit, least worried about how unaffordable living has become. You are skeptical about losing your jobs. Your home mortgages are becoming way too high. Middle class Americans anyway have that problem that we feel that our wages have stagnated for almost the best part of the last 3 decades. And here is a president who is doing nothing to fix it up. So there are already Trump ka popularity ratings, according to most independent estimates, is close to something like 25 to 30%. I'm not taking the more extreme ones into consideration. जहां पे तो वो negative में है, उसको तुम छोड़ ही दो. 25 to 30% के आसपास का आपका रेटिंग्स है. आपने ऑलरेडी इन द लास्ट पार्ट ऑफ द ईयर पूरे गवर्नमेंट को बंद कर दिया था with the idea that until and unless they don't get the healthcare bill passed, we are not going to go about financing government. And that tamasha is possibly going to happen again towards the end of January. So for average Americans, the problem is life is hard. The president is doing nothing. Is this enough to go to Venezuela? No. The worst problem is Washington, which is desperate to get the Epstein files released. 12,000 pages have been released. 2 million more are being cleared by the Department of Justice. When the Supreme Court order was that by the 19th of December 2025, all Epstein-related material should be in the public domain. Trump, sometime in the 1990s, went about acquiring this organization that goes about hosting the Miss Universe competition. And ever since Trump went about hosting it, there are 4 Venezuelan women who are crowned as Miss Venezuela, Miss Universe. उनमें से कुछ लोगों का रिश्ता एप्स्टीन फाइल्स से है. वो क्या है ये अभी क्लियर नहीं है, पर वो है इसके बारे में सबको वॉशिंगटन और कैराकस दोनों भी जगहों पे यकीन है. Until and unless the files don't get released, we are not in a position to say कि इन 4 में से किसका किसका रिश्ता was there with Jeffrey Epstein and with Donald Trump before they became Miss Universe. Are you getting that? If you remember a couple of minutes ago, I told you that Venezuela is a very beautiful country. When I said beautiful, it just doesn't mean the land. It also means the people. Among all Latin Americans, the Venezuelans are considered to be the most beautiful people. So most Latin Americans agree with the fact that Venezuelans, be it men, be it women, all of them are an extraordinarily beautiful people. That makes things more complicated. सो एक तरफ आपका घर का एक प्रॉब्लम है जो इलेक्शन ईयर में आपसे सुलझते नहीं सुलझ रहा है, ऊपर से आपके दुश्मनों ने एप्स्टीन चिल्ला के आपके दिमाग का दही लगा दिया है. नाउ यू वांट अ मेजर डिस्ट्रैक्शन इन द मिडल ऑफ ऑल ऑफ दिस. कैन वी गो टू Caracas? Yes. This, imagine, suddenly becomes a complete deflection from all your problems. और ये ऐसे ही शुरू नहीं हुआ. 25th December को on Christmas Day, Trump bombs Nigeria, which is an OPEC member in Africa. And what he goes about bombing are what are called as the basis of the Islamic State in northern Nigeria. Because he has this fascinating idea that the Muslims of Nigeria are killing the Christians of Nigeria. There's a Christian genocide which is underway and we need to stop it. ये 25 दिसंबर को हुआ है. 31st December को at the party at his Florida home, when he's asked about his resolution for 2026, I don't know what does he keep eating and drinking on, says that in full view of the cameras, my resolution for 2026 is peace throughout the earth. 3rd of January को he's in Caracas. This is basically connected with the domestic problems of the American president. He's basically looking out for a distraction. Venezuela is a very simple example for a very simple reason, because everybody knows that it's a country which cannot put up any military resistance. Just like most Latin American countries cannot do that. So अगर आपने उनको इंडिविजुअली दबोचने का कोशिश किया, वो अमेरिका को मिलिट्रीली रेजिस्ट नहीं कर सकते हैं. They can fight against the Americans all sorts of civil wars wherein they take to what is called as guerrilla warfare, which is what they have done for the Colombian Civil War. Went around for 1 century, जिसमें you had the small peasants and workers fighting along with the church against the big landlords, the military officers, and everyone who are actively supported by the Americans. That one went on for the best part of a whole century. So Latin Americans can fight those types of wars. But the army of a country fighting against the Americans, they don't have any history of that. You have tons of presidents की जिनको ऐसे ही उड़ाया गया है. In the 19th century, in the 20th after the Second World War, when this entire state system stabilized, when this idea of equal states, equal respect for other states and everything stabilized through the UN Charter, the first country to lose its president was Guatemala in 1953 when the Americans intervened in Guatemala. You had the Jamaican government being thrown out in a similar manner. You had that other 9/11, which is called as the Chilean president being killed in his palace by his army in 1973. You have the Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, की जिसकी याद लोगों को आ गई क्योंकि उसको भी ऐसे ही जनवरी में उठा के लेके गए थे. पर उस केस में Panama declared war against the Americans. You have tons of those types of examples. ये नया नहीं है, ये आज खत्म नहीं होने वाला है. इसका सबसे बड़ा रीजन ये है, Latin American countries, for all that they have, do not have the military capacities to stand up against the Americans. They can't resist the Americans. America, as compared to any Latin American country, is a very large military power with almost a black hole-like economy that can go about supporting the military power. Most Latin American countries do not have anything of this. Their favored ways of taking the Americans on: migration, resistance, popular culture, wonderful films that are very strongly anti-American. They keep on doing all of this and they're not going to give it up. And Trump knows this well. He cannot put a single soldier out there in Caracas. But suddenly now Trump tempts everybody all over the place, including an Asim Munir who can decide to go mad and decide to grab Afghanistan. आज की तारीख में इसके बाद the whole world suddenly now starts looking like a very dangerous place. Anybody can go around doing that to any other country in its region that they have had a problem with, which are small countries, which cannot militarily resist you. So the Baltics and the Russians, Russia and Ukraine, China and Taiwan. As I said, Asim Munir might suddenly decide to go mad and let's go and make a dash for Kabul. कोई भी कुछ भी हरकत कर सकता है, ऐसा वाला कंडीशन में हम पहुंच गए हैं. Simply because of the fact that Trump refuses to accept a rules-based international order. Are you getting that? Yes. Welcome. This is just the start of 2026. ये तो बस शुरुआत है. आ रहा है समझ में? 2026 जस्ट शुरू हो गया है. अभी पता नहीं और क्या गुल खिलाने वाला है.